The Saturday morning air had a particular kind of sweetness to it, the kind that only comes after a long week. It was my ritual. No suit, no tie, no heavy robe. Just me, Marcus Thorne, in a pair of old gray sweatpants, a faded Howard University sweatshirt, and worn-out running shoes. It was the one time of the week I wasn't Judge Thorne. I was just Marcus, a man walking through the quiet, tree-lined streets of his own neighborhood. The sun was warm on my face. I could smell Mrs. Gable's roses from 2 houses down and hear the distant, happy shrieks of kids playing in a backyard pool. This was my peace. My wife, Sarah, always said my Saturday walks were my church. She was right. It was where I went to shed the weight of the week, the arguments, the evidence, the gut-wrenching decisions that came with sitting on the bench. It was where I reconnected with the simple, good things. I was thinking about my daughter, Maya. She was 10, and she had a soccer game later that afternoon. I was mentally rehearsing the pep talk I'd give her, a mix of encouragement and terrible dad jokes. A smile played on my lips as I pictured her rolling her eyes at me. That was the world I lived in, the world I had built with Sarah brick by brick. A world of love, normalcy, and Saturday morning walks. That's when the world tilted. A police cruiser, moving slowly down the opposite side of the street, suddenly made a sharp, aggressive U-turn. The tires squealed on the asphalt, a sound so violent it felt like a tear in the peaceful fabric of the morning. It pulled up fast, curb-checking a few feet in front of me, cutting off my path. My heart didn't just jump. It seized. Every muscle in my body went rigid. It's a feeling that's hard to explain if you've never felt it. It's a cold dread that's both ancient and immediate. I've seen it on the faces of defendants in my courtroom 100 times. I just never thought I'd feel it on my own street, in my own skin. 2 officers got out. One was older, with a thick mustache and a belly that strained the buttons of his uniform. He had a weary, cynical look in his eyes. The other was younger, lean, with a haircut that was sharp and military precise. He looked eager, almost twitchy. "Morning," I said, trying to keep my voice even, friendly. It was a test, a simple greeting to see what kind of encounter this was going to be. The older one, whose name tag I'd later learn was Miller, didn't return the greeting. He just stared at me, his eyes doing a slow, deliberate scan from my worn-out shoes to my face. "What are you doing in this neighborhood?" he asked. His voice was flat, accusatory. The question hung in the sweet-smelling air, ugly and out of place. This neighborhood. I'd lived here for 12 years. I paid my mortgage. I served on the homeowners association for a term. My daughter's best friend lived 3 doors down. "I'm just out for a walk," I said, keeping my hands visible, away from my pockets. Years of seeing things go wrong in a split second, of hearing testimony about furtive movements, had trained me. I lived just around the corner. The younger officer, Davis, shifted his weight. He seemed to be taking his cues from Miller. "We got a call," Miller said, taking a slow step toward me, "about a suspicious individual casing houses in the area. You fit the description. Suspicious individual." The words were a punch to the gut. I looked down at my old sweats and sweatshirt. Is this what suspicion looked like? Or was it something else? I knew what it was. I had always known. But the knowing doesn't make the reality any less sharp. "Officer, I can assure you, I'm not casing houses," I said, my voice a little tighter now. The calm was slipping. "I'm a resident here. My name is Marcus Thorne. Got any ID on you, Marcus?" Miller asked, drawing out my name as if it tasted bad in his mouth. My stomach sank. "No, I don't. I didn't think I'd need my wallet to take a walk around my own block." Miller exchanged a look with Davis. It was a look of confirmation. "Of see, I told you. So you're walking around a nice neighborhood, no ID, claiming you live here," Miller said, summarizing it for an imaginary jury. "You can see how that looks, can't you?" "I can tell you my address," I offered. "It's 412 Oak Street. You can run my name. My wife and daughter are at home right now." The plea in my voice shamed me. Why was I pleading? I had done nothing wrong. But the power dynamic was absolute. They had the uniforms, the guns, the authority. I just had my sweatpants and the truth. And in that moment, the truth felt incredibly flimsy. "Everyone's got a story," Miller grunted. He stepped closer, invading my personal space. I could smell his coffee and cigarette breath. Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. The world stopped. Wait, I said, my voice cracking. On what grounds? You have no cause to arrest me. I'm just walking. The word cause seemed to amuse him. A small, cruel smile touched his lips. My cause is you're being detained for questioning. You fit the description of a burglary suspect, and you're not cooperating. How am I not cooperating? The frustration was boiling over now, hot and sharp. I've answered your questions. I've given you my name. You're getting agitated, Miller said, his voice taking on a dangerously calm tone. It was the tone of a man who was in control and enjoying it. That makes me think you've got something to hide. Now, I'm not going to ask you again. Turn. Round. Davis, the younger one, now moved to my other side. I was flanked. I saw Mrs. Gable peek through her curtains. Mr. Henderson, who I'd just waved to 5 minutes earlier, was standing frozen on his porch, holding his newspaper. Their faces were a blur of confusion and concern, but no one moved. No one spoke up. The silence was its own kind of violence. My mind, the mind of a judge, was racing through legal precedents. Terry v. Ohio, reasonable suspicion. But this wasn't reasonable. This was a pretext, a fiction built on the color of my skin. But the man, Marcus, the husband and father, was just terrified. What if Maya saw this? What if she looked out the window and saw her father being treated like a criminal? The thought of her seeing me like this, helpless and humiliated, broke me. I slowly turned around, the shame burning in my chest like acid. I placed my hands behind my back. The cold, sharp bite of the handcuffs clamping around my wrists was a shock. It felt final. In that moment, all my accomplishments, my law degree, my career, my position were stripped away. I was just a black man in handcuffs on a sunny Saturday morning. Miller roughly patted me down. His hands were impersonal and thorough. He found nothing, of course, no weapons, no stolen goods, just my house key in my pocket. He pulled it out and looked at it. What's this for? He asked. It's the key to my house, I said, my voice a dead monotone. On Oak Street. He just grunted and shoved it back into my pocket. He grabbed my arm, his fingers digging into my bicep, and pushed me toward the cruiser. The side of the car was still warm from the engine. He pushed my head down, a gesture I'd seen 1,000 times, but never understood the deep, soul-crushing humiliation of until that second dot as I was bundled into the back of the car. The door slammed shut with a heavy, metallic thud that echoed. In my soul, I was in a cage. The world outside, my world, was suddenly on the other side of a thick pane of plexiglass. I watched my beautiful, peaceful street slide by as they drove away. I saw Mr. Henderson finally lower his newspaper, his face pale. I felt like I had been erased from my own life. The ride to the station was silent. I stared at the back of Miller's thick neck. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them who I was. Do you have any idea who I am? The thought was so arrogant, so pointless, it wouldn't matter. In their eyes, I was exactly who they thought I was. The title of judge was a costume I wore in a different life. Here, in this cage, my only title was suspect. At the station, the humiliation continued under the flat, fluorescent lights. I was processed, fingerprinted. My picture was taken against a cinder block wall. I felt the grit of the ink on my fingers, a stain that felt like it would never wash off. They put me in a holding cell with a sticky floor and a metal bench. The smell of stale sweat, fear, and disinfectant filled my lungs. I sat on the bench and put my head in my hands. The full weight of it all came crashing down. The injustice was so profound, so casual. They had stolen my morning, my peace, my dignity, all based on a call. I wondered if there even was a call, or if that was just the story they told themselves after what felt like an eternity. An officer I hadn't seen before unlocked my cell. Okay, Thorne, you can go, just like that. No explanation, no apology. I walked out to the main desk where Miller was doing paperwork. He didn't look up. What happens now? I asked, my voice hoarse. Nothing, he said, still not looking at me. Your story checked out. The homeowner at 412 Oak confirmed her husband was out for a walk. You're free to go. His words were meant to sound like a conclusion, an end to the matter, but the way he said it, with such dismissive indifference, made it clear that he didn't think he'd done anything wrong. In his mind, he was just doing his job. The fact that my story checked out was a minor inconvenience, not a sign of his own profound error. "That's it," I said, my voice rising. "You arrest me on my own street. You handcuff me in front of my neighbors. You lock me in a cell, and all you can say is my story checked out." Miller finally looked up from his paperwork. His eyes were cold and hard as stone. "You should have been carrying your ID. Consider this a lesson learned. Now get out of my station." I stood there for a long moment, my fists clenched. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to unleash the full force of my position on him. I wanted to see the look on his face when he realized he had just arrested a superior court judge. But I couldn't. It felt wrong. It felt like using my power as a weapon of personal revenge. And that was a line I had sworn never to cross. My fight couldn't be about me. It had to be about the principal. So I just turned and walked out. The automatic doors slid open, and I stepped back into the sunlight. The world looked the same, but it felt different. It was tainted. Sarah was waiting for me in the car, her face a mask of anxiety. She had been the one to confirm my story. When I got in, she just threw her arms around me. I could feel her trembling. "Are you okay? What happened?" "They wouldn't tell me anything." She whispered into my shoulder. I couldn't speak. I just held onto her. The drive home was silent. When we pulled into our driveway, I saw Maya's face in the window, her soccer game. I had missed it. I walked into my own house feeling like a stranger. The familiar scent of lemon cleaner and coffee grounds felt alien. Maya ran to me. "Daddy, where were you? We were so worried. You missed my game." I knelt down and looked into her big, brown eyes, so full of innocence. How could I explain to her what had happened? How could I tell her that the world we had tried to build for her, a world of safety and fairness, had a crack in its foundation? That the color of her father's skin made him suspicious in his own neighborhood? "I'm so sorry, sweetheart," I said, my voice thick with emotion. Daddy had a problem." The rest of the weekend was a blur of quiet anger and profound sadness. I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt the cold bite of the handcuffs, saw the sneer on Officer Miller's face. The bruise on my wrist was a constant, physical reminder. Sarah was furious. She wanted me to file a complaint, to sue, to use my position to bring them down. "Marcus, they can't get away with this," she said, her eyes flashing with a righteous fire that I was too weary to feel myself. "And what would that accomplish?" "Sarah," I asked, sitting at our kitchen table, staring into a cup of cold coffee. "It would become a story. Judge accuses police of racial profiling. It would be my word against theirs. They'd say I was using my position to intimidate them. They would drag my name through the mud. And in the end, what would change? They'd get a slap on the wrist, maybe some mandatory retraining they'd sleep through. The system that allows a man like Miller to operate with impunity would remain untouched. It was a bleak and cynical view, but it was born from years of watching the system work and fail. I knew its gears and levers better than anyone. A direct complaint felt like playing a game that was rigged against me from the start. So I did nothing. I let the bruise fade. I tried to forget the feeling of the cage. I went back to work on Monday, put on my black robe, and sat high on my bench, listening to other people's stories of injustice, all while my own was afresh, raw wound in my soul. I felt like a hypocrite. Weeks turned into a couple of months. The seasons began to change. The sharp memory of that morning began to soften. Like a photograph left out in the sun, it was still there, but the edges were curled. The colors faded. I had convinced myself it was just a scar I had to live with. And then, one Tuesday afternoon, I was reviewing the docket for the next day. It was a list of names and case numbers, nothing more. But then I saw them, two names that made the air in my chambers turn cold. Defendants, Officer Frank Miller, Officer Robert Davis. My heart started pounding, a heavy, frantic drum against my ribs. It wasn't a case against them for what they did to me. It was a motion to suppress evidence in a drug case. A young public defender was arguing that the officers had conducted an illegal search and seizure, that they lacked the probable cause to search his client's vehicle. The key witnesses, the ones whose credibility would be at the center of the hearing, were Officers Miller and Davis, and I, Judge Marcus Thorne, was the presiding judge. The irony was so thick I could barely breathe. It felt like the universe was presenting me with a choice. I could recuse myself. It would be the easy, and perhaps the proper, thing to do. I had a clear personal conflict. No one would blame me. I could hand the case off to another judge and wash my hands of it. But the thought of doing that felt like a betrayal of myself, and of every single person who had ever stood before me, without the power to fight back. All those faces, all those stories of being stopped for driving while black, of being searched on a flimsy pretext, they all came rushing back to me. They didn't have a voice, they didn't have the power, but I did. My power wasn't in personal revenge. It was in the robe I wore. It was in the gavel I held. It was in my duty to uphold the Constitution of the United States, the Fourth Amendment, the right of the people to be secure against unreasonable searches and seizures. I sat back in my chair, the leather creaking under my weight. I closed my eyes and pictured that Saturday morning, the humiliation, the helplessness, and then I pictured the courtroom, my courtroom, the one place where the rules were supposed to matter more than the color of your skin or the uniform on your back. I would not recuse myself. I would hear the motion. I would be fair. I would be impartial. I would listen to the evidence and apply the law. That was my oath. And I would make them look me in the eye while I did it. The next day, the courtroom was buzzing with its usual low-grade energy. Lawyers whispering to clients, clerks shuffling papers. I went through my morning ritual, a routine that now felt heavier with meaning. I centered myself. I wasn't Marcus, the man who was arrested. I was Judge Thorne, the arbiter of the law. I had to be. My bailiff's voice boomed. All rise. I walked out from my chambers and ascended the 3 steps to the bench. It was a small elevation, but the symbolic distance it created was immense. I sat down, the heavy robe settling around me like armor. I looked out over the courtroom, and I saw them. They were sitting at the prosecution's table, next to the assistant district attorney. Officer Miller looked bored, confident. He was probably thinking this was just another routine motion he'd have to swat away before getting back on the street. Officer Davis looked younger and more nervous in the formal setting of the courtroom. Neither of them looked at me, not really. They saw the robe, the bench, the position. They didn't see the man. "Good morning, counsel," I said, my voice calm and steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside me. "We are here to hear the defense's motion to suppress in the case of the People versus Henderson." The public defender, a young, earnest woman named Ms. Alvarez, stood up. She laid out her argument clearly. Her client had been pulled over for a broken taillight, a minor traffic infraction, but Officers Miller and Davis had claimed he was acting nervous and furtive, which they used as justification to order him out of the car and conduct a full search, where they found a small quantity of drugs. Ms. Alvarez argued this went far beyond the scope of a simple traffic stop. The ADA presented his counter. The officers were veterans. Their instincts were sharp. Furtive movements and nervous behavior were classic indicators of criminal activity. It was a dance I'd seen 100 times. The whole case rested on whether I believed the officer's justification was credible. The people call Officer Frank Miller to the stand. The ADA said. Miller swaggered to the witness box. He took the oath with a practiced air of solemnity. He sat down, adjusted his uniform, and looked at the ADA, ready to give his performance. He still hadn't really looked at me. The ADA led him through his testimony. Miller's voice was confident. He used all the right buzzwords. Subject avoided eye contact. I observed furtive movements toward the center console. Based on my training and experience, I had reason to believe my safety was at risk. It was a neat, tidy story, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that it was a lie, or at best, a gross exaggeration, a script he used to justify violating a citizen's rights. The same script he had used on me. When the ADA was finished, he said, "Your witness, counsel." Ms. Alvarez did a decent job cross-examining him, but Miller was good. He was experienced. He deflected. He stayed on script. He was unflappable. Then Ms. Alvarez sat down. There was a pause. I looked down at Miller in the witness box, and for the first time, he looked directly at me. He was waiting for me to make a ruling, to dismiss the defense's frivolous motion. His eyes met mine, and I saw it. A flicker, a tiny, almost imperceptible spark of confusion in his eyes. The cogs were turning. He was looking at my face, really looking at it, and a dawning horror began to spread across his features. His confident smirk faltered. His face went pale. The blood drained from it so fast I could almost see it happen. His mouth fell slightly open. He knew in that moment he wasn't looking at Judge Thorne anymore. He was looking at the man in the Howard sweatshirt from that sunny Saturday morning. I let the silence hang in the air for a few more seconds, letting him sit with the realization. I could see Davis, at the table, looking from Miller's panicked face to mine, his own expression shifting from nervousness to sheer, unadulterated shock. I leaned forward slightly, my voice quiet, but carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Officer Miller," I began, "I have a few questions for you myself." His Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. "Yes, Your Honor." The words came out as a strangled whisper. "You testified that the defendant's furtive movements were a key factor in your decision to search the vehicle. Can you describe for the court, with specificity, what those movements were?" He shifted in his seat, Your Honor, and his hands, he was moving them near the console. He was flustered. His practiced testimony was gone, replaced by stammering uncertainty. "Did you see a weapon, officer?" "No, Your Honor." "Did he threaten you in any way?" "No, Your Honor." So, a man being nervous and moving his hands during a traffic stop is, in your professional opinion, sufficient cause to believe he's armed and dangerous, justifying a full search of his vehicle in certain situations. "Based on my experience," he trailed off, his eyes pleading with me now. I shifted my gaze to Officer Davis. He flinched, as if I had struck him. "Let's talk about the initial stop," I continued, my eyes back on Miller. "A broken taillight. Is it standard procedure to immediately suspect someone of a more serious crime for a simple equipment violation?" "No, but we have to be vigilant." "Vigilant of what, officer?" I asked, my voice cutting through his excuse. "Vigilant of people who look a certain way, who are in a certain neighborhood." The words hung in the air. I hadn't mentioned my own arrest. I didn't have to. The context was screaming from the walls. Miller's face was now slick with sweat. I sat back. I had heard enough. "I have heard the testimony and the arguments of counsel," I said, my voice regaining its formal, judicial tone. I looked at the young defendant, then at Ms. Alvarez, and then, finally, at Officers Miller and Davis. The Fourth Amendment to the Constitution is not a suggestion. It is a cornerstone of our liberty. It protects all of us from unreasonable government intrusion. The standard for that protection is probable cause, a standard that must be based on concrete, articulable facts, not on vague feelings, not on a person's nervousness, and certainly not on a pretext to go on a fishing expedition. I paused, letting the words sink in. The testimony of the officers today has been unconvincing. The justification for escalating a minor traffic stop into a full-blown vehicle search rests on a foundation of subjective feelings and boilerplate language, not on the solid ground of probable cause. To allow this search to stand would be to render the Fourth Amendment meaningless for anyone who happens to get pulled over. I looked directly at Miller. His face was a mask of defeated disbelief. Therefore, the defense's motion to suppress the evidence is granted. The evidence was obtained in violation of the defendant's constitutional rights and is inadmissible. In court, I banged the gavel. The sound was sharp, final. "We are adjourned." The courtroom erupted in hushed chaos. Ms. Alvarez was hugging her client, who was crying with relief. The ADA was packing his briefcase, his face grim. Officers Miller and Davis just sat there, frozen at the table. They looked like statues, defeated, exposed. I rose from my chair, and as I turned to walk back to my chambers, I saw Officer Davis put his head in his hands. I didn't feel triumph. I didn't feel the sweet rush of revenge I might have expected. I just felt a profound, heavy sadness and a small, quiet sense of rightness. I hadn't acted as Marcus, the victim. I had acted as Judge Thorne, the guardian of the law. I had used the system to check the system. That evening, I came home and told Sarah everything. She listened silently, her hand covering her mouth. When I was done, there were tears in her eyes. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "But I'm so sorry you had to be the one to do it." She was right. It was a burden, a heavy one. The next Saturday, I woke up to the same sweet-smelling morning air. I put on my old gray sweatpants and my Howard sweatshirt. For a moment, I hesitated at the door. The memory was still there, a ghost on my front porch. But then Maya came up behind me. "Are you going for your walk, Daddy?" I looked down at her bright, hopeful face, and I knew I had to. I couldn't let them take this from me. I couldn't let them make me a prisoner in my own home, in my own life. I stepped outside into the sun. The air was crisp. Mrs. Gable's roses were still fragrant. The world looked the same. But I was different. The scar was still there. A faint line on my wrist and a much deeper one on my soul. But it wasn't a mark of shame anymore. It was a reminder of my vulnerability, but also of my responsibility. A reminder that justice isn't an abstract concept in a law book. It's a real, tangible thing that has to be fought for every single day on the streets. And from the bench, I started walking, my old shoes scuffing on the familiar pavement. I was just Marcus again, a man walking through his neighborhood. But I was also Judge Thorne, and for the first time, the two finally felt like they were the same person.